Boris Johnson today gave a speech to the Confederation of British Industry that had the country asking, is the Prime Minister drunk? The topic of the speech to business leaders was a so-called Green Industrial Revolution, and Boris Johnson announced a requirement for new homes to have car charging points. The announcement was accompanied by the following impression.
And that tipping point having been reached, the pace of change is now going to accelerate like a new Tesla. Because I can tell you, as a former motoring correspondent, EVs may not burble like sucking doves, and they may not have that rum, rum, rah, rah that you love, but they have so much torque that they move off the lights faster than a Ferrari.
That was Boris Johnson on electric cars. He then went on to cartoon characters.
And Tony, yesterday I went, as we all must, to Peppa Pig World. I don't know if you've been to Peppa Pig World. Hands up anyone who's been to Peppa Pig World? Not enough. It's fantastic. I was a bit hazy what I would find at Peppa Pig World, but I loved it. And Peppa Pig World is very much my kind of place. It has very safe streets, discipline in schools, heavy emphasis on new mass transit systems, I notice, even if they're a bit stereotypical about Daddy Pig.
If you thought both of those clips were awkward, it only got worse.
So with safer streets, with great local schools, with fantastic broadband, forgive me. People will have the confidence to stay nearer the place they grew up, to start business.
The speech, or at least its delivery, was widely derided, and the Labour Party got in on the act. So they tweeted the following: "The joke's not funny anymore," which is a repetition of a line Keir Starmer used recently at Prime Minister's Questions. He's said it a few times now. A new line they are going with. I can also see, actually just updated on my Twitter, apparently a senior Downing Street source has told the BBC that business was really looking for leadership today and it was shambolic. They added there was a lot of concern inside the building about Mr. Johnson. So there are people in Downing Street upset about Boris Johnson's performance. That's according to the BBC. Aaron, was this speech a genuine flop, or are we just looking at Boris Johnson being Boris Johnson and this is his USP, which is to be silly and entertaining in, moments that most people would think were inappropriate to behave in such a way?
Well, I think some people have to make up their minds, Michael. The critics of Boris Johnson, I mark myself as a critic of Boris Johnson, but people say he's a fascist. He's a fascist. He's a neo-fascist. Trump, Johnson, and then he's banging on about Peppa Pig. And it doesn't really make it very convincing fascist if he's talking about a cartoon piglet. So I think, actually, one thing I'll say a positive thing about Keir Starmer. He said that he's not a bad man. He's a bad man, of course, but he's a trivial man. And I feel like this is a trivial subject. And my worry is with Labour to focus on the trivialities. I saw loads of people on Twitter just losing the plot. Going, he's lost his place in a speech. He should resign. Really? He should probably resign for some other things. It reminded me of the wallpaper stuff. Now, I think this lands more than the wallpaper because this is quite visceral and there's literally a video clip of him looking like a complete idiot and incompetent. I'm more concerned, however, about the political substance of what the CBI is saying, or the industrial policy of the Labour Party or the Conservative Party. And in this country, Michael, we have a media class and a political class obsessed with triviality. And as long as we have a media class and journalists fixated with triviality to this extent, like we're in some bad game show, we aren't going to solve the major problems that confront us as a society. Demographic aging, climate change, income inequality, housing crisis, infrastructure, COVID, or even the next pathogen. God help us when that comes. So, yes, it's funny. Yes, it makes you laugh. Yes, it's good that the opposition can land some blows on this and discredit the party of government, of course. But also don't discount the fact that there'll be Tories waiting in the wings, Sajid Javid rubbing his hands together going, I can step in next. And Sajid Javid, he's looking at the tax rises saying, no, thank you. He's looking at the spending on public transport, which, yes, they weren't what was previously promised, but still, a major shift for the Conservative Party in the context of the last 30, 40 years. He would never do that. So this could very much empower certain elements on the right of the Conservative Party who want less state spending, lower taxation rates. Because Boris Johnson is operating in a context, COVID, Brexit, where he's had to do those things, and they're very angry with him. So he is politically weak. The idea that he's untouchable in Teflon, just not true. He is very exposed politically because he's going against the core values and policy positions of many of his own MPs. But I'd be worried as journalists that we're sort of talking about how bad one speech was. Let's talk about the fact that the CBI, which, by the way, if there is a failure of an organization when it comes to interest representation, nobody has failed in representing interests like the CBI in representing the interests of British industry over the last 10 years. You know, they were talking about we need austerity in 2010, and then today they're saying we've not invested enough in public infrastructure. That's what you wanted. That's what you wanted. So that contradiction for me is more interesting than Boris Johnson talking about Peppa Pig. The captains of British industry, if I call them that, they're mostly useless. Actually, the head of the CBI, Michael, he's just another think tanker. He's another guy who worked in a consultancy. So he's talking private enterprise and private business. And you've never done it. You know, if the guy had started his own business, worked in had a family business, worked his way up, worked in a multinational, fine. But he actually was an advisor and a consultant. He went on the exact same trajectory as many people within the Labour Party. And they try and talk with such credibility about business. Keir Starmer does the same thing. You're a lawyer. That's fine. Society needs lawyers, but don't start talking about fiduciary and, fiscal policy and all this stuff. Very worrying, Michael. But I'll finish with this. My focus would be on the failures of British industrial policy over the last 10 years, led on by the CBI, cheered on by the Conservative Party, and until Jeremy Corbyn, never resisted by the Labour Party. That deserves our scrutiny, not Peppa Pig.
I agree with you. The whole speech thing is trivial, but you did make a case as to why it would matter if Boris Johnson's downfall was imminent. And on that topic, there was an interesting piece in The Guardian. It was by Will Davies, friend of the show. And in the piece, he compares Boris Johnson to a financial asset traded on the stock market. Johnson's political stock resembles a financial asset in a number of ways. First, he is of no intrinsic value. That he has no aptitude for or interest in governing was known before the pandemic, but took on a fatal dimension in March 2020, at the cost of many thousands of lives. He lacks any consistent political vision or ideology and runs scared of difficult decisions beyond following whichever advice he received last. We know that he is also hedonistic and lazy, hence the constant holidays. Given all of this, his compulsive lying is not even his worst trait as leader. All of this raises the obvious question of how he found himself in such a job in the first place. This is the second way in which Johnson resembles a financial asset. His value is founded on the fact that his supporters are all watching one another as much as him. Like a dot-com company circa 1999, he is someone to get behind so long as everyone else is behind him. But especially the media. So Davies says it's this media attention, especially, for example, hosting Have I Got News For You or having a Telegraph column that has made Boris Johnson a focal point for people on the right. They've got their own political agendas. They want someone to front it who is recognisable. They choose Boris Johnson. Davies, though, however, also says that it's Johnson's reliance on the media and media attention that could prove to be his downfall. Financial assets suffer a major deficiency, an absence of investor loyalty. No doubt Johnson has close friends scattered around the higher reaches of the media and the Conservative Party, but it's hard to identify any Johnsonites, given how little he stands for beyond himself. As a celebrity, he is better suited to attracting fans than allies. The recent tightening of the polls and negative headlines surrounding corruption may not represent a bursting of the Boris bubble, but they do clarify how little Johnson has to fall back on should the press turn truly hostile. Then says, Cummings presumably flatters himself that like some hedge fund wizard, he started shorting the stock at just the right moment. It's always a mistake to underestimate Johnson's tenacity and hunger for power, but a political opportunist can scarcely expect anything more than opportunistic support. It's likely that once one set of investors pulls out, such as the Murdoch press, many others will flee. Aaron, I wanted to know your take on that argument. Is Boris Johnson like a financial asset in the sense he's got no intrinsic value, and that means that his stock could fall as quickly as it has in the past risen? Could this whole thing just collapse internally, and either that hand over Downing Street to the Labour Party or whoever in the Conservative Party wants to replace him?
I mean, I really disagree. I mean, I like Will, but that just reads very strangely. Just had the local elections. Labour did terribly. The Tories have won Hartlepool. They almost won Batley and Spen. The guys won a majority of 80. When all the London Liberals were saying that Remain was going to get 60% of the electorate, running on Leave was actually what got the Tories over the line. He waited for his time and actually did incredibly well in becoming Tory leader. He won twice as the mayor of London. The idea that he's like, come on, everybody thinks they've got this giant brain and this guy's, he's nothing on them. Come on. I just don't think it's realistic. I do think he's having to do things which he wouldn't normally do, which is clearly angering his base and angering MPs, people like Sajid Javid, committed free marketeers, and they don't like what he's doing. If they were in his situation, they would have to do something very similar, simply by virtue of the nation's finances and the challenges we face over the coming decades on decarbonisation, on demographic ageing, on the fact that a big part of their electoral mandate came from this thing about levelling up. They're going to have to spend more on infrastructure. They're going to have to, unless they want to lose those votes. So I think that's a bit strange. And look, when Ed Miliband was leading the opposition a year into, 18 months into the Cameron Osborne thing, he would be polling 8-10 points ahead, right? Labour just sort of level pegging now. So I think it's a bit presumptuous to say that. We've never been here before, and being Prime Minister is very different to being Mayor of London. It may be that the guy just completely collapses in flames, but there are many, many, many MPs, Michael, who owe their seats to him. And so that does establish some loyalty. Who replaces him? Who's the stalking horse that is credible in their eyes? And they think, well, I won't lose my job if that person is the next PM. Sajid Javid? Rishi Sunak? Priti Patel? It's tough. I mean, I think Rishi Sunak's probably their best bet, but he's very untested, fundamentally. And then finally, and this boils down to sort of my core thoughts on this, do they think the media is going to back the Labour Party? Because even Keir Starmer, everything he's doing, everything he's saying is still well to the left of the Labour Party of Ed Miliband on HS2, on Northern Powerhouse Rail, on levels of taxation. He's still got a party membership, which is a variable in British politics. Would you really want that party to be running the British state? Yeah, okay, it's nowhere near Jeremy Corbyn. Certainly you'd prefer Rishi Sunak running Whitehall and, making sure your taxes weren't too high and so on. So I think this reflects a crisis actually of the economic orthodoxy we've been living in for 30, 40 years. And there's kind of like an aneurysm going on amongst the British establishment saying, we don't want to pay taxes this high. Well, you're going to have to, whoever's in charge. Great cover by The Economist this week, the return of the big state. It's back. Get used to it. And for me, that's why Johnson's in trouble. But I don't think that necessarily creates political opportunities for his rivals either. So yes, there's cause for concern. Let's see. People were saying this, by the way, about Johnson. People were saying he'd be locked up over wallpaper 6 months ago. The whole thing was ridiculous. Let's see. Can he weather it? If he weathers it and then moves on and then moves to 5-point lead in the opinion polls, people forget about this.